everyone to the R.E.S.T podcast, where our goal is to help each and every one of you displace confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in order to heal and find significance in life. I am your host, Natalie Roberts, and I am here with the author of the Reconstitution Method for Healing and R.E.S.T, Virginia Dixon.
Good morning, girls. I'm so excited about today's podcast. Michele, Kelly, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, we have a big story here. June 19th, we decided that, I guess it's the day when we celebrate freedom for Pride Month. I didn't know what Juneteenth was, that it was June 19th. But I told the girls, well, that's perfect. If we're celebrating Pride, let's gift R.E.S.T, because every single one of us knows that a proud heart becomes a hardened heart. And when a heart is hardened and it is proud, what happens? Things begin to unravel in our lives. There isn't a single person listening today whose life is not in a state of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. And in the quiet of their heart does not know, I've got some issues myself. No matter how proud, how arrogant, however they seem, it's in the quiet places of our hearts and those secret quiet places of our heart that we realize, wait, I'm out of control, or I'm the cause of my own problems. Interestingly, those same people, when you encounter them, right, it's a whole different story and they seem proud and arrogant and whatever. I know that's not entirely what the month represents, but at the end of the day, where there is pride, there is no freedom. So I was shocked to know that on Juneteenth is when we celebrate Pride. Because first thing that ran through my head is, why would they do that? If there's pride, there's no freedom. So I understand the play on words, but the fact is, behind pride is a hardened heart and a shattered soul. There's pain and there's anger. So you two have a long story with the podcast I had no knowledge of, but you guys stayed up. So I want our whole listening audience to hear about you, because one of you represents what I address often and what's happening in the mental state and the hemorrhaging heart of our nation, right? In America, we have a broken heart and a shattered soul, and that's why we say that mental illness is this crisis. But Michele, without further ado, you're a voice for mental health industry and that you've been with them 25 years. And Kelly, you have been in the system for 25 years. One is a professional and the other one is a recipient. And so you guys have a big story. With that backdrop of how we met, I'll let you take it from here. Michele.
Yeah, like you were saying, I've been in the mental health field for over 25 years. Started in my 20s, back in the 90s. And I've worked pretty much every aspect, inpatient, outpatient, in-home services. I work with people with autism, children, adults, families, you name it, pretty much done everything. And I started listening to your podcast about a year ago, and something just resonated with me. It was just, these were concepts that I've known all my, professional career, but there was just something missing. And your podcast seemed to, pinpoint what is missing in the system, treating the whole person. And it just really piqued my interest, and just things just started resonating with me, and I started connecting the dots.
Thank you for that, because most of our listeners are educators, are in the healing business, or they're in the medical business and in mental health business as well. And the others are really people that have tried everything, have been in counseling for a number of years, and something about what we talk about resonated with them. So thank you for that background. I'm just excited because you're going to bring so much context for our listening audience beyond what I'm able to give alone. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Sure.
Thank you for your faithfulness and for sticking to it. It wasn't always easy tracking with everything, was it?
No, it wasn't.
And I look forward to you saying what things made you uncomfortable. Kelly.
Hi, Virginia. It's great speaking with you. What you don't know is I've been friends and have known Michelle since probably kindergarten. And despite having a friend who works in the mental health field, I do have some drug and alcohol and mental health issues that I've been struggling with. And last year, your podcast was really a lifeline to me. At that point, I was misdiagnosed with bipolar 2, and I was on all kinds of medication, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And that's when Michelle told me all about you, and I would just lay there and just soak up every word that you were saying and just trying to grasp everything that I could, and was able to get myself off of those medications that were just feeding into the chaos and the confusion and the disease.
Wow, that's amazing. How did everything begin to unravel for you in terms of the system? And then, Michelle, feel free to chime in as you can give context, because there's so many people listening to us today that literally didn't know what to do with the confusion, chaos, and disease that came in whatever form.
And I think I was kind of just describing it to Kelly earlier, like, if you break your leg, compound fracture, your bones sticking out of your leg, you go to the emergency room, and, there they say, we're going to help you, but, unfortunately we don't have the time, money, resources, or manpower or knowledge. So we're just going to push your bone back in and put a Band-Aid on it and send you home. And when you come back 3 months from now, and then what happens? You go home, there's a Band-Aid on your leg, you get an infection, your leg hurts, it starts to affect your relationships. You go back 3 months later and they say, oh, we're going to clean that up for you, and now we're going to put 3 Band-Aids on it and come back in 3 months. And that's kind of what the mental health system does. It just puts little Band-Aids on things, it medicates and tells you come back in 3 months. And managed care, it's a lot of times insurance won't pay for anything more than a Band-Aid.
That's a good point. You know what, while you were speaking, I feel so much compassion for our colleagues and people who care deeply about the state of mental health, because many of them found their purpose in their own pain, right? And so they became facilitators, and because of the confusion, chaos, and disease they were trying to reconcile to and understand, by the way. Nothing wrong with that, right? The point is that individually we find the purpose in our pain. And I think what I feel so much compassion about in what you just said, Michelle, is that the education system, the conversation we've been having for 40, 50, 60 years here in this country, specifically as we deal with mental health, it's just limited. It feels limited, and it's been driven by so much philosophy. All your isms drive so much of what's become the philosophical, the political, and politics, right? Not just philosophy, but then you get the political system involved, but all these isms. And so I think what I've observed is that, and I'd like you to comment on this, we have a lot of pieces of good information, but they're not being brought into wholeness to address a cohesive worldview that is reasonable to the fact that we're dealing with people that have a spirit, a soul, and a body. So there's so much. And then the politics got involved into that discourse, and it's crazy.
Right.
Thoughts about that, Michelle?
I've been doing this for, 25 plus some years, and I can see instead of making progress, we are going backwards. When I first started in the field, working in a hospital, and it was the only specialized hospital in the country with an inpatient unit that dealt with children with autism. And at that time, the average stay was 3 to 6 months. And we could get so much done, so much progress. Parents would come in for training, train us, things like that. And then, managed care and, the insurances stepped in. And then that stay gradually went to, you're lucky if you get now 3 days. What can you accomplish in 3 days? Basically, a quick assessment and medication. And they're out the door, and then they come right back in. So it's a revolving door, in, out, in, out, in, out. So I don't see any progression. We're kind of going backwards.
Well, I'm inspired. I'm hoping that people like you listening, because all we want to do is we don't want to criticize and attack. What we want to do is have these conversations so we can put our heads together and realize, how do we fix these systems?
Mm-hmm.
But certainly much of where we find ourselves has been driven by all the isms of philosophy and the infusion of the political system into this whole thing. And then, of course, the economy of
Right.
mental health is staggering. It topples global economies, the global economies of small nations. So it's a money grab.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why
Definitely.
people like you are so important. And I think all of us that care, that have anybody with a pulse that isn't part of the money grab,
Mm-hmm.
says, hey, we can be better. We've got to do more. And that's why your thoughts and your
Right.
input is so important.
Because I can guarantee you, anybody that's not part of the money grab is not in this for the money, because there's no money to be had, unless you are, a doctor, a psychiatrist. To be brutally honest, you're not going to ever make more than 45 grand a year. So anybody that is doing this is not in it for the money. And I don't want to use the old, they want to help people, but they really do.
Well, I think Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote an amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score, I studied under him for an intensive, for a year of just intensive trauma study, research. And I got to tell you, he made a statement towards the end of one of our classes, and it goes something like this. But when the system we're working with is more broken than the people we're working for, looking to serve, it's time to go rogue, and we got to start having another conversation. I think that is the goal. The goal is to do exactly what Dr. van der Kolk says, and it's to rise up, to have an expanded conversation on this. We all know that early childhood attachment trauma and chaos in the home, by the way, has a direct effect on the development of our children. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk did enormous research on the subject. So Dr. Bessel van der Kolk basically said the reality is that the thing that's become the mental health system in many cases, at least as it's conventionally understood, is in a state of great dis-ease, if you will, and illness. And it's sicker than the people we're servicing.
You can't fix broken people with a broken system.
That's it. We cannot fix broken people with a broken system. Mm-hmm. So good, Michelle. Thank you for that. But that's what we're dealing with. And Kelly, you're on the other side of this.
I'm one of the broken people going to the broken system and coming out worse than I was before I went to the system.
Why?
Well, I was like a partier growing up. And so whenever I had an abortion at age 21, I used alcohol as a coping mechanism that got way out of control. And that led into drug addiction. I was addicted to crack cocaine for a number of years. I was eventually able to overcome that. But the alcohol was an on and off binge. So everything was kind of stabilizing. But then I hit perimenopause. I also had something called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I went to my gynecologist to get help, and she referred me to a psychologist. This psychologist did a little assessment over the phone, and she passed me off to someone who was supposed to be a well-known psychiatrist. And this psychiatrist talked to me for maybe 20 minutes over Zoom call, put me on hold, and next thing you know, bing, bang, boom, I'm on lithium because I'm bipolar too. Well, I was told that premenstrual dysphoric disorder often mimics bipolar too. And so the lithium wasn't working. I was then put on 2 other medications. One made me angry. I've never had a manic episode until I was on one of these medications and was like dancing around in my apartment, felt like I was on ecstasy. The other ones made me so angry. I have never been in such a rage in my life. And then she put me on a final medication. I think it was Seroquel that just totally knotted me out, just made me so tired that I couldn't even function. And so there was something in my spirit that knew that it was wrong, that it was totally breaking me. And I had to titrate myself off the medication and just get away from that. But I was
Were you
struggling the
able
whole
to
time.
do that by yourself? Were you able to do that by yourself?
I wasn't on these medications for a long period of time. It was just a period of a couple of months, but I have never felt more out of control than I was at that time.
You have no idea how many times in a given week I hear this story and the calls we've received over the last decade.
Virginia, I was praying to God, and this is probably not a right prayer or a nice prayer, but I was, God, please either heal me or let me totally lose my mind so that I just don't care enough to get well anymore. Because I'm tired of trying. I'm tired of having this hope that's dashed every time and nobody can help me. I found myself going to the therapist that they wanted me to go to, and I'm bringing my How We Love book and I'm quoting you in your podcast, and they have no idea what I'm talking about. But I was just grasping on for any kind of hope.
Well, I am praying that we can have hundreds and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of therapists call in, and that I have an opportunity, honestly, to sit in rooms with many, 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 many therapists all over the country. And Michele, I know you're in the social service arm and mental health part of this, but I tell you, we have got to expand conversations beyond what's conventional so we can hear people like Kelli say, the system's killing me, slowly killing me.
Literally.
Right. And my soul is my mind, my heart, my will, my conscience, my feelings. It is literally destroying my very soul. Can we all talk about this? And I think who's going to lead the charge in this discussion is going to have to be people like you, Kelli, and people like you, Michele. And me, I consider the state of California says I'm a thought leader and an educator. So I stay in that realm because I think that's my sphere of influence now. But I did study neuroscience. I studied psychology at UCI, and I didn't consider myself an excellent student at all because I always saw education as a means to an end. I didn't see education like most people see education. And it's really ironic because I come from a family of educators. My grandfather was the dean of education in Montevideo in Uruguay, the country where I'm from. And I come from a long line of educators. I always saw myself more as a colander, as a sift. So I kind of had more questions than I felt like I had answers in college. And by the way, it was wonderful, and I'm thankful for the education I received, and I learned a lot of things. But what I really learned was how to reason. And perhaps that's why with R.E.S.T, I invite people to reason. We have got to reason. That means engage the mind, the heart, the will, the conscience, the feelings. Engage our soul, our very soul, in how we're processing the information we're being given. Whether we're patients, students, leaders, it doesn't matter what we are, what field we find ourselves in. We have got to reason, check with our soul, again, our mind, our heart, our will, our conscience, our feelings, and negotiate what we're being asked to consume and say, is this life-giving? Or is this diminishing my life? And many people try meds. Many people try drugs. Many people try alcohol. So the heck what? We try all these things to reconcile this conflict, right? But you guys, when it's not working, and just stop. We just have to stop and think. Whatever we do, we have to stop and think. Is what is happening to me outside of my control or in my control? And I have an easy answer for you. It is always, 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 always within your control. because you have a little fingerprint that speaks to your uniqueness. And I believe your brain, I might add, which is an infinite system that'll never be replaced or changed, or nobody's ever going to give you a new brain. So the fingerprint and the print in our very spirit bears witness of our uniqueness. And if something's not right, it's just not right. Whether you're the recipient of mental health, in your case, Kelly, or in your case, Michelle, you're the dispenser. You're in the system. Anyway, did that make sense a little bit? I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but there's so much to talk about around these themes.
Absolutely, it did. It did make sense. I mean, when I first started listening, I was in such a state of confusion, chaos, and disease. I didn't even know if I was understanding correctly, but my spirit was understanding. I might not have been, but it was speaking peace to me. It was speaking life to me. It wasn't. I think that's what gave me the courage to get off the medication and to just keep pursuing this. And I didn't listen to your podcast once. There's times I had to listen to the same podcast over and over again, just because you are in that state where you're like, do I understand? And sometimes you don't, and that's okay too.
I love what you said. I hear that often. People tell me they've had to listen to the same podcast 2, 3, 4 times sometimes. Mm-hmm. You're nodding your head, Michelle?
Yeah, just sometimes. And then sometimes when you go back, you find other little nuggets that you missed. And also I found too with like the podcast, I did the first 20 and then I thought, well, I'm going to skip around to things that either interest me or pertain to me. But then there were times when Kelly would point out like, oh no, did you listen to the one on Lyme disease? And I say, oh no, that doesn't really pertain to me. But then I listened to it and then there were points that it was just, wow, this makes sense. This clicks. So there's so many little things that you can draw out by going back or listening to things that you think don't pertain to you or don't interest you.
Well, I think Kelly touched on it a little bit, and I know she had to get up for a minute, but she touched on it a little bit when she said, spiritually, things resonate with you, but your mind's a little bit slow to process it. Do you know why? Because your spirit will always resonate with something that's true, especially sometimes when your conscience convicts you, or let's say accuses you. Your spirit knows something is true. At that point of tension, sometimes it feels like, oh, thank God I'm not crazy. But other times it feels like I'm not going to do that because I can't do that. I don't have money. I don't know how that's even possible. So you start already defeating the things that your spirit, that are resonating within your spirit that you need to do or understand or act on from what you heard. Whenever you're confronted with truth, there's something that doesn't sound right, or it sounds right, but you don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. That's what you need to press into. For everybody listening to us today, there's sometimes, and the girls just touched on this so well, whenever you hear something that you have to listen to 2, 3, 4, 5 times, I want you to realize that if it accuses you or it encourages you, either way, but you don't see a possibility of applying that principle, press into that, because that's the very thing you need to be free. Did that make sense? I don't know. Maybe that was too convoluted. You guys can say
that made sense.
No, it did. Yes.
I think, and we're taught in society, like what they tell us is true and what isn't. And it becomes conventional wisdom. And so you're listening to all that. You're taught that. You're regurgitating that. But then when I started listening to your podcast, you're speaking truth. And you don't understand it, head knowledge, but your spirit is understanding that. You're hearing truth like for the first time.
Right. Because I think we discussed too, like, some of the words that you do use in your podcast, like liberty and freedom and things like that. And Kelly was, I don't want to say having a difficult time, but like, how do you define liberty? And I'm like, stop trying to use the dictionary, but it in your heart. You know what it means in your heart, instead of trying to process the exact verbiage for what the definition of liberty is.
Well, I went back to the Noah Webster dictionary that Virginia references 1828. Oh my goodness. It's like you look up the word light or liberty, and it's scripture
There it
based,
is.
and there's so much life in the definitions.
And that's why the knowledge of good and evil becomes really important when you understand the difference of liberty and freedom. When you understand the difference between the two, then you realize that good and evil is a very short step between liberty and freedom. This is so important. I'm going to try to address this point. Part of what's causing us so much confusion, chaos, and dis-ease is we are not defining words. Much of it is a fruit of what's happened with standardized education. We've escaped from reason. We've stopped reasoning. We don't teach kids how to reason. We teach them how to regurgitate. This is what we're going to tell you. This is what it is. And now let's see how well you memorized it, and write and tell us about it. Instead of teaching competing worldviews, becoming familiar with these competing ideas, and then challenging people, what are your thoughts on this and why? Defend your position. It's the same. It was what Michele said happens in doctors' offices, and how they used to treat children with autism. You used to get them for 2, 3, 4, 5 months to work with that child to help facilitate and reconcile the side effects and the implications of autism. Instead,
also to teach the parents, because we used to have a lot of parents come in and say, show me what you do here so I can do it at home, so I can learn, so I can, and at one point I remember there were some parents that, they would come and they would say, well, you do parent training, please show us what you do here so I can, take it home. And we had to tell them, no, we're not allowed to do parent training anymore because it's not a billable service.
Okay, we are ending this segment on that note because I want to record another short segment with you around the concepts of liberty and freedom, good and light and dark, good and evil. I wanted to have that conversation with both of you, both because you're in mental health and you're the recipient of the system. You two have inspired me beyond measure. Thank you so much. That note that you just closed us out on, Michele, that is it in a nutshell.
Was that good?
Michele, that was so powerful. It's a matter of fact. I want you to expound on that as we close, because it's going to take us into the next segment. The bottom line you just said is we used to be able to
teach them tools, teach them techniques, teach them. And now it's, like I said, it's a Band-Aid. Here's a pill.
There's no time, and the insurance will not cover. Can you imagine? Michele has all the information. These doctors that dedicate their life to studying this, they did it for noble reasons. They have the answers, but in comes the system that's crushing the people they're supposed to serve.
Right.
And Michele just basically told us we're not allowed to teach the real healers, which are the parents.
And I don't mean to I know the doctors are doing everything they can. And,
of course,
I've known psychologists and therapists and, behavior specialists and things like that. But, now I think the system is just so overrun with people needing help. And there's a shortage of mental health professionals. The ones that are there they're drowning. They're burned out, or they're retiring. And I find a lot of colleagues are going to other vocations because, it's less stress, it's less responsibility, and they're making the same money to go to Target as you would to be a case manager or an in-home behavior specialist.
Well, I want to shout out to all the mental health professionals and all the doctors and all of us mental health, everybody in the mental health business and the medical business, and actually in every vocation. If you are drowning in the confusion, chaos, and disease of our time, please hold on. Don't throw everything away. you will make the greatest contribution to your profession and your trade if you understand these principles of rest. They're universal and they have application in a broad spectrum of vocations, from ministry to corporate America. So, and everything in between. So thank you, girls, so much. Closing words.
I just want to thank you, Virginia, for what you do. Again, like I just want to reiterate, you were a lifeline. You helped me get through one of the darkest times of my life. This podcast is just such a gift. And I encourage people, if you're listening for the first time and you're struggling to get through it, just keep pressing through, just keep listening, and you'll get it. Your spirit will get it.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia.
All right, everyone. For updates about R.E.S.T and this podcast, please visit our Instagram or Facebook, The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to virginiadixon.com/collaborate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to R.E.S.T with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.